There's a verse in Mishlei, Proverbs, Perek Gimel, Perek 3, chapter 3, Yud Zayin 17. It says, Derachea darchei noam, its paths are pleasing, v'chol netivodea shalom, and again its paths are peaceful. Okay? Then in Yudchet, in 18, it says, Etz Chaim hi lemachazikim pa, it is a tree of life for those who grab onto it, v'tomcheha, and those who support it, meushar, are praiseworthy. Okay? Etz Chaim hi. Now when I was going to give over this lecture, I wasn't sure if I was going to say this particular lecture or not. And I actually asked Hashem, I said, give me a sign if I should say this particular lecture over about the Etz Chaim. So then what happened was, when I was invited to speak, I was told that I was going to be invited to speak into a shul called the Etz Chaim, like it says up there. And right away I knew, I said, God is telling me I should say over this piece. And that's how I knew. And that's why I want to just give an introduction to what I'm going to talk about, this Etz Chaim. What is an Etz Chaim? A tree of life. Tree of life is basically the Torah, the Bible. It's called a tree of life. Okay, why is it called a tree? Because a tree is a structure, which means everything's all-inclusive. It's a conceptual structure. Without getting into that, which I'll explain, and Chaim of life, because this Torah, this Bible, brings a person to a state of life, whether it's in this world or the next world. All good things come out of that, okay? Now, just to divert for a second, when we study science, and I'll show you something. When we study science, what is science about also? Science is the study of the physical universe. What do? They reduce everything into components that are on the bottom of it, so to speak. For instance, you have three things: ice, water, and steam. Three different things, okay? Someone came along and found that these three things are really one thing called H2O. Hydrogen, oxygen. But there are different states or forms of them. Solid, liquid, gas. But it's the same thing. So that's called reducing three things into one thing. See? Then, of course, science kept reducing and found atoms and subatoms and quarks, that everything we have, to the table, to a tie, a book, everything's atoms or quarks at the end. So that's a reduction. And at the end, even these few things that science is up to will be reduced even more till we hit one bottom rung of something, which is going to be it. And it's going to be that one thing that everything of the world comes out of. And what would happen is, the world would recognize at that point that that is the one thing that God created. God only created one thing. But the way that thing vibrates or does or moves or whatever we want to call it, whatever their language scientifically is, makes different things, okay? Now when you learn science by itself, you could lose God. That's why it's not good. But if you learn science from a godly standpoint and you just want to figure out some of the things that God has made, then it's very welcoming. You're supposed to study all these studies because it's part of what God made. Now, someone came along, and we probably will be familiar with his name, Albert Einstein. Good old Albert. Okay, and what did he say? He did another reduction. He took different things. He took two sets of things: time and space, and matter and energy. And he said that those two, the two are the same, and these two are the same. What does that mean? Somehow time and space are not two things. It's the same thing. However that is, I don't want to get into all the workings of it, but time and space is really two expressions or forms of one thing that is the real thing. Okay? But leave that aside. I want to get to the matter-energy part, which is the famous E equals mc squared. Okay, E for energy, M for mass or matter. Matter and energy, two different things. Energy is energy. You can't touch it, but we know it's here. And matter or mass is a thing, a concrete thing. How can they be the same thing? But that's what he did. His theory said that matter and energy is the same thing, which means there's frozen energy when energy freezes or consolidates or whatever the word is, it'll turn into a thing, you see? And if you can extract the energy, so to speak, from it, you could make a bomb. That's where all the atomic bombs and things come from this understanding. So matter and energy is really the same thing. Okay? Now here's the thing. We have time, space, and they coin it. Instead of saying time and space, they coin a phrase now called, I think it's actually the other way, space-time. Space-time, like it's one thing. And mass energy. That's how they call it. If you look in science books, it's mass-energy, like it's one thing. Mass energy and space-time. And that's where they're up to. Now, is there something that will unite the four things? Einstein never did this. His theory of relativity never did that. Meaning that things are relative because there's something on top of them that is making them. That's the relativity. Relative means. So if you have, is there something that would make us coin a phrase called space-time mass energy? You see? And it would be one thing that would make all those be the same. See, it's one thing to say matter and energy is the same, but how do you now link that to space and time? He never did that. But we know, based on, well, actually we'll see how we know. There's something called, that Rabbi Mendel Kessin just coined a phrase, so I have to say his name. There is a super substance, and he says it that way because we don't know what that thing is in reality, that there's a super substance, a thing that will unite these four things. Okay? Now there's something called superstring theory, but even superstring is not the super substance, because even the superstring, if you know about that, will also come from this super substance, meaning this super thing, which is the one thing God made, and everything comes out of that. Whether it's a book or an angel or anything. One thing at the end, forget just space-time mass energy, but even the spiritual universe is going to come out of this one thing. At the end, God made one thing. Now, science only studies the physical universe, but we're going to find there's a spiritual universe above that. And even this one thing that God made, everything comes out of that. Okay? Now, what can we imagine this one thing is?